The quiet streets of Nantes, France, had witnessed thousands of ordinary mornings, where neighbors exchanged friendly greetings and children hurried off to school without a second thought. Nestled among those peaceful homes stood number 55 Robert Schumann Boulevard, a modest house that belonged to the Dupont de Ligonnès family. From the outside, they looked like the picture of stability. Xavier, the father, carried himself with the confidence of a man descended from French aristocracy. His wife, Agnes, was deeply devoted to her Catholic faith, teaching at a religious school and dedicating much of her free time to church activities. Together they raised 4 children, Arthur, Thomas, Anne, and Benoît, each with dreams, ambitions, and futures that seemed limitless. Friends described them as respectful, educated, and close-knit. Nothing about their lives suggested that they would one day become the center of one of France's most haunting criminal mysteries, but behind carefully maintained appearances, invisible cracks had already begun spreading beneath the family's seemingly perfect life. Xavier had spent years trying to convince everyone around him that he was a successful businessman, yet reality painted a much darker picture. Failed ventures, mounting debts, and financial pressure quietly followed him everywhere he went. Even so, no one imagined that these hidden struggles could lead to unimaginable tragedy. In April 2011, the silence surrounding that family home would become louder than any scream, transforming an ordinary suburban address into a place forever remembered as a symbol of horror. Before investigators uncovered the truth buried beneath the property, the entire family simply seemed to disappear, leaving behind questions that would echo across the world for years to come. The first signs that something was terribly wrong didn't come from police officers or detectives, they came from neighbors, who knew the family's daily routine almost by heart. Around April 11th, the house suddenly fell silent. Every window shutter remained tightly closed, something neighbors insisted had never happened before, not even when the family went on vacation. Days passed without seeing the children leave for school, or hearing the family's 2 black Labrador dogs barking in the yard. A handwritten notice taped to the front door instructed the mail carrier to stop delivering letters, adding yet another layer to the growing unease. At first, people assumed the family had left unexpectedly, but as each quiet day passed, concern slowly replaced curiosity. Eventually, worried neighbors contacted local authorities, who arrived at the residence expecting to perform nothing more than a routine welfare check. Finding the front door locked and no response from inside, officers called a locksmith to gain entry. Inside, the house appeared strangely untouched. Furniture remained neatly arranged. Personal belongings were still scattered throughout the rooms, yet the beds had been stripped bare, and several closets stood open. There were no signs of violence, no obvious evidence of a struggle, and nothing that immediately suggested a crime had occurred. Believing the family had left voluntarily, investigators initially walked away without launching a full investigation. It was a decision that, in hindsight, would prove to be one of the most devastating misjudgments in the entire case. As relatives and friends desperately searched for answers, unexpected letters began arriving in their mailboxes. Each typed message appeared to come from Xavier himself and contained a story so unbelievable that it almost sounded like the plot of a spy novel. According to the letters, Xavier claimed he had secretly worked for the United States Drug Enforcement Administration and that his undercover identity had been compromised. To protect himself and his family, they had supposedly entered a witness protection program and fled France under new identities. The letters instructed recipients not to attempt contact for several years and asked them to tell anyone who inquired that the family had relocated to Australia because of Xavier's work. Despite how extraordinary the claims sounded, many people accepted them without much suspicion because Xavier had always possessed an eccentric personality, capable of making the impossible seem strangely believable. Not everyone accepted the explanation. Agnes's relatives immediately sensed that something felt deeply wrong. They could not imagine her abandoning her close family, her faith, or her responsibilities without saying goodbye. The letters raised more questions than they answered, and instead of reassuring them, they fueled growing fears that something terrible had happened. They forwarded the documents to prosecutors, insisting authorities take another look at the disappearance. Their persistence would ultimately change the course of the investigation. What many had dismissed as an unusual family relocation was slowly beginning to reveal itself as something far darker, a mystery carefully wrapped in lies, waiting for someone determined enough to peel back the layers. Police returned to the property several times over the following week, carefully examining every room, every hallway, and every forgotten corner of the house. On each visit, they noticed small but unsettling details. Family photographs had been removed from their frames, leaving behind empty glass rectangles as though someone had intentionally erased memories from the walls. Yet despite these disturbing clues, investigators still found nothing that clearly pointed toward murder. It wasn't until April 21st, after multiple unsuccessful searches and mounting public pressure, that officers expanded their search beyond the interior of the home. What they uncovered beneath the terrace would forever redefine the Crin investigation. In shock, an entire nation hidden beneath layers of earth were carefully concealed. Burial sites, wrapped in black plastic bags. Inside those graves lay the bodies of Agnes, Arthur, Anne, and Ben. Nearby rested Thomas in a separate grave, along with the family's two beloved Labrador dogs. Each victim had been buried alongside religious objects such as crucifixes and candles, suggesting whoever committed the crime had taken deliberate time to stage what appeared to be a solemn farewell. The horrifying discovery instantly transformed the missing persons investigation into one of France's largest manhunts. Yet one person was nowhere to be found. Xavier Dupont de Ligonnès, the husband and father, had vanished completely. From that moment forward, he became the prime suspect and one of the most elusive fugitives in modern French history. As forensic experts began their painstaking examination, disturbing details slowly emerged. Toxicology reports revealed that the four children had traces of sleeping medication in their systems before they died, suggesting they had been rendered unconscious before the attack. Agnes, however, had not received the same medication, likely because she relied on a sleep apnea machine during the night. Investigators concluded she was probably the first victim. Every family member had been killed by two carefully placed gunshots to the head from a .22 caliber rifle, a weapon that had recently come into Xavier's possession after the death of his own father. Yet despite the horrifying precision of the murders, the house contained almost no forensic evidence. There was virtually no blood, no fingerprints, no DNA linking anyone to the killings, and no clear indication of where the murders had actually taken place. The lack of physical evidence left investigators facing a baffling contradiction. Everything seemed to point toward Xavier, yet almost nothing could scientifically prove his involvement. Friends struggled to reconcile the accusations with the man. They thought they knew a devoted father who often spoke proudly about his children and family heritage. Even Xavier's own relatives questioned whether he could have physically buried 6 bodies beneath the terrace due to long-standing back problems. Some even entertained extraordinary theories that the victims had somehow faked their deaths, or that authorities had made catastrophic mistakes during the investigation. But while speculations spread across France, detectives focused on a different question. If Xavier had truly murdered his family, then what could possibly have driven a man with everything to lose to destroy the very people he claimed to love? The deeper investigators looked into Xavier's life, the more they realized the image he had carefully built over decades was beginning to crumble. Behind the polished manners and noble family name was a man drowning in financial disaster. Years earlier, Xavier had dreamed of building a successful business in the United States, relocating his family to Florida with hopes of creating a prosperous future. Instead, every venture failed. When they returned to France, the family's savings had nearly vanished. Yet Xavier continued pretending everything was under control. He spoke confidently about successful companies and important business trips, but creditors were closing in, debts were mounting, and the illusion he had created was collapsing faster than he could maintain it. For a man who valued status, reputation, and family honor above almost everything else, admitting failure may have felt impossible. In early 2011, another event seemed to mark a turning point. Xavier's father passed away, leaving behind little more than financial hardship and a family heirloom, a .22 caliber rifle. Surprisingly, Xavier, who had never shown much interest in firearms, soon obtained a legal license for the weapon and began practicing regularly at shooting ranges. Witnesses later recalled him asking detailed questions about silencers before eventually purchasing one along with ammunition. Around the same time, records showed him buying black plastic bags, cement, lime, adhesive materials, and tools that investigators believed were later used to conceal the bodies beneath the family terrace. Piece by piece, these purchases painted a disturbing picture not of a sudden act of rage, but of someone quietly preparing for something unthinkable long before anyone realized the danger. According to investigators, the family's final days unfolded with heartbreaking normality. On Sunday, April 3, 2011, Xavier, Agnes, and 3 of their children enjoyed what appeared to be an ordinary evening together. They shared dinner at a local restaurant, watched a movie, and eventually returned home, like countless families do every weekend. Nothing about that evening suggested it would become their final memory together. Later that night, Xavier left a voicemail for his sister describing their pleasant outing before ending the message with words that would later haunt everyone who heard them. "See you soon, maybe." At the time, it sounded harmless. After the bodies were discovered, those 2 words became impossible to forget. The following morning, Anne and Manhunt failed to appear at school. Friends messaged them repeatedly but received no replies. Teachers were told they were sick. Meanwhile, Thomas had already returned to university, believing everything at home was normal until Xavier contacted him with alarming news. He claimed that Agnes had suffered a serious bicycle accident and was lying unconscious in a hospital. Concerned, Thomas rushed home without hesitation. Instead of finding his injured mother, he shared one final dinner with his father at a local restaurant. Witnesses later remembered that Thomas seemed unusually quiet before suddenly appearing ill during the meal. That night, he sent one last message to a friend. After that, no one ever heard from him again, while his family lay buried beneath the terrace. Xavier appeared strangely calm. Investigators later discovered that he had quietly closed bank accounts, settled outstanding school payments for his children, canceled the lease on the family home, and informed employers and educational institutions that the family was relocating to Australia. It was as though he was carefully erasing every trace of their existence before disappearing himself. Neighbors even reported seeing him moving heavy black bags into the trunk of his blue Citroën several days after the murders. Yet, despite these unsettling observations, nobody suspected they had just witnessed the aftermath of one of France's most horrifying crimes. On April 10, Xavier finally left Nantes and began driving south across France. Unlike someone desperately trying to escape, he made surprisingly little effort to hide. His credit card was used at hotels and restaurants, speed cameras captured his vehicle traveling through several towns, and security cameras recorded him withdrawing cash from It almost seemed as if he wanted investigators to follow his trail. Some detectives later wondered whether these obvious movements were intentional, carefully planned route designed to create one final chapter before disappearing forever. Every stop along the journey added another piece to the mystery, but none brought investigators any closer to finding the man they believed had orchestrated it all. The trail eventually led investigators to a small hotel in southern France, where Xavier's abandoned Citroën was discovered sitting quietly in the parking lot. Security footage captured what would become the last confirmed sighting of him, carrying a long black bag believed by many investigators to contain the rifle. Xavier calmly walked across the parking area before briefly looking directly into the surveillance camera. It was an ordinary glance lasting only seconds, yet for those investigating the case, it felt strangely symbolic, as though he knew the camera would preserve his final appearance forever. Moments later, he disappeared into the surrounding wilderness, and from that point onward, every trace of him simply ended. Authorities launched massive searches across nearby forests, mountains, abandoned mines, and isolated terrain, convinced they would eventually discover his body. Nothing was found. No weapon, no clothing, no remains, and no evidence that he had taken his own life. Instead, countless theories emerged. Some believed he escaped aboard a cargo ship to South America, where his ability to speak multiple languages could help him start over. Others suspected he sought refuge inside a remote monastery, living quietly under a false identity. Over the years, hundreds of reported sightings surfaced across Europe and beyond, each raising hope before ending in disappointment. Despite countless investigations, Xavier Dupont de Ligonnès remained a ghost, a man who had seemingly vanished without leaving behind a single definitive clue. More than a decade has passed since the peaceful family home on Robert Schumann Boulevard became a crime scene that shocked the world. Investigators have pursued hundreds of leads, examined unidentified human remains, and even arrested individuals mistakenly believed to be Xavier. Every promising breakthrough eventually collapsed under closer examination. Despite the overwhelming circumstantial evidence pointing toward him, the case remains officially unresolved because the man believed to hold every answer has never been found. Without his arrest or confirmed death, many questions remain painfully unanswered. What truly happened inside that house during those final days? Was every step carefully planned months in advance, or did something suddenly push Xavier beyond the point of no return? Those questions continue to haunt investigators and the victims' loved ones alike. Today, the names Agnes, Arthur, Thomas, Anne, and Manhunt are remembered not simply because of the horrifying way their lives ended, but because they were ordinary people whose futures were stolen by someone they trusted completely. Their funeral brought together more than 1,000 mourners, each grieving lives cut tragically short. Yet, even after all these years, justice remains out of reach. Whether Xavier died alone somewhere in the wilderness, or successfully escaped to begin another life under a different identity, only one certainty remains. Somewhere within this mystery lies the truth about what happened inside that quiet family home in April 2011. Until that truth is finally uncovered, one of France's darkest true crime cases will continue to stand as a chilling reminder that sometimes the most terrifying secrets are hidden behind the most ordinary front doors.